I just thought I'd ask all of you, if you are here, we are going to be talking about reclaiming narratives. As you've heard, I'm a narrative person. And I'd like you just to think in your mind, if you were to introduce yourself in 2 sentences, and you were to connect this question of decolonization, where it hits you at home, right? The things you wake up and do every day, the books you choose to read, the programs you choose to watch, the language in which you greet your children, your friends, your neighbors, your base, whatever it is. How do you connect with this question of decolonization? I think we started with such an amazing note. I went back home yesterday and listened to Dr. Nyairo, and one of the things I appreciated about the way it was almost like she prepared the ground for the seeds that we've been planting, to use the metaphors of what we've been through. And one of the things I really loved is that each one of us has found a challenge for ourselves. So I want to bring that home, to think about decolonization, especially now in the face of decoloniality for many of us. And decoloniality is really about the ways of thinking, of being in the world, of living that we are used to. So take a second and ask yourself, I'm going to ask this of my panel as I start. Guys, you have 1 sentence to talk about, this is who I am. We've had the pretty bio that we were given by Mwihaki. I am timing ourselves, so you guys have 1 minute. Let's see how well you'll do with that. And it's as simple as saying something like this: I am passionate about the word. In my beginning was the word, and that is why, as part of my work, I link the word on page and word on stage. I am obsessed with Kanga or Leso. I research it, I teach it, I have workshops on it. If you ever want to buy me a gift, no worries, just go and buy me a Leso. That's who I am. Over to you, Kiarie. Who are you?
Well, thank you very much. I'm Kiarie Kamau, and I would say that I'm very passionate about African languages. What my bio did not say is that I have studied Kiswahili up to master's level. I wish I could have continued like Professor Kimani Njogu up to PhD level. But what I do is ensure that we publish Kiswahili books as well as many other African language books as possible. So I would say that I resonate with African languages, African publishing and writing, speaking in African languages. Thank you.
I have a question for you. You said, it said English, Kiswahili, Spanish? That's what Mwihaki told us. Oh, it was, okay. I know who I'm coming to, because I have a question about if you don't speak any other African language except Kiswahili. Yes. But thank you very much. So let's go to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, just to answer you first, I do speak another African language, which is Gikuyu. Okay. But indeed, I'm Chege Githiora, by the way. I am a professor of linguistics, currently at Kenyatta University. For 21 years, I taught at the University of London, School of Oriental and African Studies. And before that, I taught at Boston University. And I've also taught in Mexico City, from where I wrote the first ever Swahili-Spanish dictionary, which we launched here in this Louis Leakey auditorium 20 years ago. So in short, yes, I am very passionate about languages. All my degrees that I've studied, academic degrees, are in linguistics, and I publish in Gikuyu, English, Swahili, and Spanish.
Fantastic. I asked that because I've only just recently learned, when people ask me what languages do you speak, I used to start with English. How many of you are like me? We start English, Kiswahili, French. Now I say Kitaita. I'm learning Kikuyu and Kenya Sign Language, and then I also speak English, French, right? And that's the way it should be. Sunny, talk to me about yourself.
So my name is Sunny Dolat. I'd say that I'm deeply passionate about African fashion, African dress practice, and African textiles.
Okay, this is why he's sitting close to me. Okay, so we're going to give them a chance, just first of all, to speak to us about what they're passionate about. It's 10 minutes, gentlemen, so that we will have a chance to also have a go and forth. And because we ended the last panel, I'm going to change I was going to do it a bit differently, but we ended the last panel on the note of language and talking about African languages and the fantastic thing about this being a decade of indigenous languages. So I thought perhaps we might start with that conversation, Prof, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's already afternoon to everyone. I must begin by thanking Professor Kimani Njogu Twaweza and the sponsors of this event today. I think it is very important that we have these discussions. We often have them in class at the university, but it is not often that we have the synergy from people from different fields. And on that note, I quickly want to link what you just said a minute ago and what others have said before. There was talk about food, how important food is. It is. We all ate. We are going to eat again and again and again. But before we ate this morning, we spoke. We talked. We used language. We either said good morning to our people, and even if you're not living with other people, you may have said something to your dog or to your cat. Verbal language. So language is equally important. The other point that ties in very well with the previous discussions is about diversity. Diversity. We've been told about the problems facing the world due to monocultivation, the grabbing or the withholding of seeds, seed material, and so on and so forth. Now, diversity is good. It is what nature intended. And therefore, when we start policies of monolingualism, we are actually acting against nature. When we tell people to stop speaking all those many different languages because they're confusing to us, let's speak one language, which is English or Kiswahili for that matter, we are actually going against nature. So diversity is key to language. The old saying that when a library dies, or when an old man in Africa dies, a library dies along. A whole library is like burning down a whole library. Same thing with language. When one language dies, a whole system is dead. Now, linked to that, and that's my main thing because we have very short time to talk about this. What I'd like to say is, yes, we are talking about reclaiming our heritage. We are talking about bringing back, restitution of what has been lost. Now, true enough, a lot of things have been carried away from Africa to Europe, physically. All those artifacts they find in the museums in London or wherever. But language has not been taken away from us and taken abroad. It is here with us. It is us who are refusing to use it. So there's a bit of a difference here. Yes, through language policies, both colonial and post-colonial, our languages have become devalorized. We have placed more value on European languages in particular. If you look at Africa, 2,500 languages, you can count a handful of languages that matter in Africa. And they're mostly European languages. You can throw in Arabic as an African language there. But all the rest of the 2,500 languages are shunted to the side because they confuse us, right? Because they are problematic. We cannot run a nation if we have only one language, so many languages. Now, talking about decolonizing, we need to decolonize our minds from that idea because that is a European idea. It is an idea in the construction of Europe. European countries that came to colonize Africa and Latin America and elsewhere, they came from monolithic backgrounds imposed upon themselves. It is not to say that there is only one language in Spain, for example. Yet, only one variety of Spanish language, not even the other varieties of the same language, was exported, the Castellano was exported to Latin America. So now, it is after Chinese, it is the most widely spoken language in the world today. Now, that idea that Spain belongs to the Spanish languages for Spain, French languages for France, German languages for Germans, and of course, English is for the English. Well, there's a question mark there because it's for British, but there are other languages therein which have been shunted aside. Now, that project is the same one that was imposed as a colonial project in Africa. Well, you have these 60 beautiful languages of Kenya, but please put them on the side. Let's talk one language so that we can build a nation, so that we can become like Europeans. Well, it may sound very, very sensible, but in the long term, this is as bad as monocultivation that we have been talking about today, which destroys diversity, which brings about new diseases which cannot be treated, which involves endless investment, buying seeds every year and so on and so forth. So when we kill all these other languages of Africa and concentrate on one, whether it's English or Kiswahili for that matter, then we are running the danger of impoverishing the world in terms of language and cultural diversity. So in terms of decolonizing, I would say it is a conscious effort to scrutinize your own position and how you do it. And I think you've said it very well this morning. Examine yourself. How do you use language? Which languages do you prefer to speak most of the time? It is both a collective as well as a personal decision and effort to do. On a day-to-day basis, we have to continue decolonizing our minds, whether it is in our homes, whether it is in the classroom, whether it is in lecture rooms, or preaching to the converted such as yourself. I'm assuming that you are with me in this particular area. But it is something that has to be done on a constant basis. Secondly, most important, is fidelity, right, and cultural self-affirmation. That means valuing our Gikuyu, our Zoluo, our Ekegusi, our Kitaita, right? Actually giving it value in your own mind, because one thing that we have as a problem is, in terms of African languages is what I call the psychic disbelief in the possibilities of our own languages, right? How can we go to the moon? How can we make computers that speak Swahili or that can operate in Doluo? Wow, come on, that's impossible. That disbelief, the idea that you cannot argue science, you cannot argue scientifically without using a European language, this is actually where the decolonizing process must begin. We must do that. Concomitant to that, and I think in order to address the idea of this diversity and how to handle it, because that's a major question. Indeed, yes, we value all these languages, but how do we actually manage them? Well, multilingualism is a policy across the world. Many sensible countries have multilingual policies, and that means giving value, all right, valorizing not just one language, but several languages. From a scientific point of view, multilingualism, or even bilingualism, right, it is actually very good for you. When you speak 2 languages or 3 languages, you have 2 or 3 systems in your brain. You have 3 phonological systems, you have 3 semantic systems, you have 3 ways of argumentation. So you cannot convince me or anyone who actually understands language as a science that a multilingual person or bilingual person is disadvantaged in any way. In fact, many of the studies we have done indicate that good knowledge of the first language promotes the better learning of a second language, right? So instead of what we call subtractive bilingualism, whereby we tell the kids as soon as they get into the classroom, forget your language now, ni Kiingereza or Kiswahili, right? What we need to do is practice additive bilingualism, where you are adding to the existing language, not removing one in order to replace it with another. Because as I've said, generally, human languages, you'll be amazed at their similarities. They look very, very different, and they sound very, very different. But if you look at them objectively, if you look at the syntax of most languages, if you look at the word order of all words languages, there's only like 4 types. Those who start with a subject and an object and a verb, those who start with a subject and then a verb and an object, or vice versa. They start with an object, go with a verb, and then a subject. But all languages in the world have those 3 elements. So actually, once you master one system, i.e. one language, you're actually more capable of acquiring other languages. So that's one point I would say. Now, furthermore, what we need to do is simply revert to Ngugi wa Thiong'o's 1981 call, decolonizing the mind. So in the process of decolonizing language, we must decolonize the mind first. And so that's why I really like this discussion, because it's not only among linguists, we know what we're saying, but we can see we share a lot in common in terms of what we really need to do to the mind. So Ngugi asked in 1981, when you write, you are writing for who? Right? The reality of African languages, of Africa today, is that here we sit here speaking in English, we are a tiny minority, a tiny elite minority in this country and on the continent. The vast majority of Africans actually do not speak English to the level that we can have this kind of conversation. The day-to-day activities across Africa, I would dare you to tell me that they do not happen mostly in African languages. Once we step out of this NMK today, out there, we will not be speaking English, most likely. We'll be speaking Kiswahili, Sheng, Gikuyu, Doluo, whatever it is. So the reality of the fact is, we like to believe that English is a savior for us. But actually, It is a savior for a tiny minority. It also acts to isolate the larger, the larger groups from ourselves because they cannot follow this discussion. They cannot understand what we're saying. Bang Bose in Nigeria over the years has done many studies and demonstrated very clearly, even in Nigeria, English-speaking nation, Commonwealth country with very close links to Britain and so forth, he concluded that less than 25% of Nigerians actually are competent in English. They are probably very competent in Nigerian Pidgin English, which is a variety of English that is indigenous. Now we are talking about indigenous systems, and that's my next and probably last point, that the vast majority of us actually use African language. So why should we insist that, why can we not see the easiest thing to do is to revert to the use of African languages? So because of time limitations, all I could say is that what we need to do, there are several things that we must do. We must sit down and catalog our African languages. That dictionary I presented here 20 years ago, I have not seen a follow-up. That's a 20-year gap between a dictionary and another. Big languages of the world, they have vast numbers of dictionaries. And you cannot ever finish writing dictionaries. And therefore, it's important that we have, not just as in English, not just the Oxford University Dictionary, you have the Cambridge University Dictionary, you have Webster's for the Americans, you have et cetera, the same language, huge volumes and ongoing material. In fact, so the online dictionaries, such as the Oxford English Dictionary, they're actually now taking our language and making it English. So when you go to the Oxford English Dictionary today online, you will find the words matatu, boda boda, all right? I think you even find Buddha. Huh? So this is what we're talking about. We must catalog. We must take that effort ourselves. That languages are not like artifacts. They're not just artifacts that we can keep in a museum. Somebody said it here. Culture is like a river. It is dynamic. It is ongoing. Returning to the roots, part of it also means translation. Retranslation is very important. I think recently Ngugi wa Thiong'o has declared that he is now sitting down to retranslate all his works, return them back to the original Gikuyu that he intended to write with, but he couldn't at the time. So that is part of decolonization. That all the books, I have not seen the one book that was cited here, Facing Mount Kenya, a seminal book for at least for one, the first probably ethnography by an African of an African community, 1938. I have not seen it in Kikuyu. It is in Kiswahili, which is good, but it is not in Kikuyu, which is the language of the people being studied. 3, we must elevate the role and value of orality. Okay? Now, the era we are living in, of the digital era and so forth, is clearly telling us that the written word is not the final word. It's not the only word. Okay? Books now do not have to be in this format. They can be in oral form, they can be in digital form. Audiobooks are plentiful in English from all over parts of the world. We can concentrate on that because our languages are largely oral. When you put Gikuyu or Dholuo, one of the tone languages on script, you are losing a lot. The prosodic features of the language, the tones, right? They are completely lost by being reduced into writing. But when you're saying it, it comes through. So we must do that, raise the value, just like the 1970s movement elevated the word orature and removed the dirtiness of oral literature to make oral literature mainstream. In the same way, we need to say that spoken language is as valuable as the written language. And we must make use, therefore, of these opportunities offered by modern technology, the media, and so on and so forth. Finally, not finally, I could say a lot more, but
I need you to.
Yes, I have to say that the role of not just scholars, I have heard scholars being mentioned here very much. Of course, we are the first in the line of attack, right? Because we are supposed to produce ideas. But in terms of language, I can assure you that not just researchers, but teachers, right? Language practitioners, writers, poets, dramatists. These people are also equally important in maintenance and promotion of our languages. So I will not even get into the main point, which was we must get these languages back into our curriculum. The CBC is making attempts, but I am still yet to see Kenyatta University offering any African language other than Kiswahili. We are doing very well in Kiswahili, both in Nairobi and elsewhere, and Pwani and all universities, but none of them seems to be offering any other African language. That is a problem. Thank you.
Chapcha sana sana sana.
Okay.
And I just want to give a shout out. We talked about verbal, we talked about written,
Yes.
and we have all this. I've been following what's going on with the sign language interpreting, and I think it's important for us to also start to think about languages that are signed, that our bodies are happily doing. So thank you. Let me give a shout out to the sign language interpreters. I will come back to you at the end. I was going to ask you this now, but I know we've run over your time, so I'm going to bring you to the questions. That question of the decade, and also that Kiswahili now has a day that the whole world celebrates.
Yes.
And is that just token, but does it have meaning? But let me come to this question of books. You know how, guys, you go out to buy a book for your child. I'm going to come back to this little publication which I want to talk about, which the museum is selling of Meketilili. And you don't find proper nice books that are us. You know, the one your child picks up and wants to read. They're good pictures. These are the stories of us. And I want to ask what we are doing about that. Karibu ndugu.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it's a bit disconcerting to talk after Professor Chege Githiora, an expert in linguistics, a scholar for that matter for many years. But I'm happy, at least, he has left one side, that is publishing, writing, and so on, for me. Let me resonate with what he has just talked about, Ngugi's treatise, Decolonizing the Mind. That the whole process of decolonization of the mind, reclaiming our identity, going back to the roots, must start with the language. And I want to quote what he says, his clarion call, that if you know your mother tongue or the language of your culture, and then you perfect it, on top of it, you add other languages, English, Spanish for that matter, French, and so many other languages, that is empowerment. But if you do not know the language of your culture, you do not know your mother tongue, but you are an expert in all those other languages, that is enslavement. So the clarion call is we go for empowerment. Let us empower our people. Let us empower the learners. Let us empower the children. And how do we empower them? I think it has to start right from the roots. I always have this argument, especially in social places, about names and identity and so on and so forth. And when somebody asks me, what is your first name? I say, Kiarie. No, I want to know your first name. I say, my first name is Kiarie. So when we look at it in a broader sense of the word, in Africa, or other in African society, when a child is born, let me give the example of among the Agekoyo, because it is very known, the naming system. When a child is born, if it is a boy, straight away, you know the name is XYZ. If it is a girl, the name is Y. So there is no time that a child is born as a boy and then the mother exclaims, wow, it's a boy, this is John. It's a boy, this is Lawrence. It's a boy, this is Smith. It is an African name. It is already known. There is no argument about it. The same applies to language. You are born into a specific or a certain language setup, your mother tongue, or the language of your culture. So the responsibility, first and foremost, lies among the parents, the guardians, the people who are interacting with that child as it grows. And some of those people are also the teachers. But then the teachers might ask, well, we want to progress it, but where are the materials? what are the publishers doing? What are the authors doing? What are the distributors, booksellers for that matter, doing? And I want to say, practically speaking, not much has been done, especially in Africa. Not many people have taken the risk of investing in publishing of books in indigenous African languages, purely because of, one, the aspect of colonization, the aspect of enslavement, the aspect of lack of the desire to reclaim our culture, and culture starts with the language. I have brought with me a couple of books here. They are textbooks in various languages spoken in Kenya. We have Gikuyu, we have books in the Luo, Ekegusi, Kikamba, Kigiriama, Lologoli, and others which are not here, but they are available even in bookshops. And I want to mention that apart from these books in African languages spoken in Kenya, we have also done 7 languages in Zambia. We have done books in Kinyarwanda. And we are set to do books in virtually every language that is spoken in Kenya. We talk about 42, but before we close that gap, somebody comes and says, no, you must segment this from the other one. But now, Professor has talked about the issue of curriculum, the CBC. And I want to say that the CBC is trying to mainstream African languages, teaching of African languages at the lower levels, first and foremost, progressing to higher levels up to colleges and universities. But it is starting now at grades 1, 2, 3. The Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, and I don't know perhaps whether there is a representative of KICD here, called for submissions way back in 2017, 2018, for people to submit books in various local languages. Submissions were done. Another call has been done recently, actually within this month of March, because it is geared towards ensuring that the levels of grade 1, 2, 3 have got the right materials, the right books, the right learning and teaching materials in indigenous languages for all the languages that are spoken in Kenya. But what is the flip side? Is that we have distributed the books far and wide. The uptake is not very promising, and as a commercial publisher, there are so many questions that would be asked by the board and even the shareholders, the rationale of investing in an area that is not bringing a return on investment. But you see, the return on investment could be in monetary form, but at the same time, in form of the philosophical, cultural, sociological aspect of it is very important. At the end of the day, there will be the coin, coming, but have we invested culturally? I want to go back also to the issue of politicizing the whole aspect of African languages and saying that encouraging the teaching of African languages, the diversity that Professor talked about, is encouraging tribalism, which is very unfortunate because that is just in the mind. There is no time that speaking one's language would be encouraging tribalism. There is no way that identifying with one's language group would encourage tribalism. Rather, it would encourage cultural diversity. It would encourage that pride of belonging, the pride of place. Which brings me also to the area of, now, from there, how do we innovate in Dholuo, in Kikamba, in Kigiriama, in Kipokomo, and those other languages? And I think the best example is the Japanese and the Chinese. Most of the products that we are using here in Kenya come from China. And I look at sometimes even the instructions that are given in broken English, but the fact of the matter is that we are using them. They have innovated. They have used their own language, cultural belonging to come up with solutions, technological solutions, among so many other solutions. They are distributing those solutions all over the world. They are earning from those solutions. And in order to share, they are investing in English, not necessarily to perfect it, but at least to say, this is how to apply this particular product. That is what we should do in African languages. In our endeavor to distribute these books, I do remember there was a session at Maseno University, and one of the professors mentioned that even in the area of medicine, often one goes to hospital and you want to explain to the doctor what is ailing you. And you talk about the pain that is starting from this part, goes down, concentrates on a certain part, then down, and so on and so forth. That is best explained in a language that one understands well. And the person you're explaining to will get the gist of the matter. So what are we saying? That let us support the teaching, the learning, the speaking of African languages. Let us invest in distributing of the same. Let us invest in encouraging our children to learn here and in the diaspora. And how do we do that? Apart from what I have just talked about, when you go to social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, and so on and so forth, there is a proliferation of enthusiasts of African languages doing short skits, encouraging plays, and so on and so forth. The proliferation of TV stations and FM stations in indigenous languages. I would like to see the current, analysis, statistics of the viewership of, let's say, Inoro TV vis-a-vis other TV stations in English that broadcast in English and Kiswahili. I would not be surprised that they surpass, because people resonate with that message that, speaks, to the heart, speaks to what they do understand. So thank you very much. I would wish to say more. I have so many books, so much to talk about here in other African countries, what we have done, the challenges, the excitement, because it is there. We could not have done all this if there were no buyers, and much more. Thank you very much.
Siyabonga. And I will come back to you and I will ask you the question of what you just said in terms of affordability. And as I say that, I'm going to ask that you start to bring up, please, Sunny's slides. I went to the museum bookshop before this because I absolutely love, and if you haven't gone and seen the Heroes of Kenya gallery, please, please, please do that. And I wanted to buy the books. And I was told that this booklet is going for 600 shillings,
Whoa.
right? And I thought about all the kids who come here, like literally thousands, and how any child who goes to that exhibition will come out and say, I want to buy that story. I want a book to go home with. But many of them will not afford this at 600. And I was told it's because to get the quality of this, right, the color, the everything, that's why it costs so high. So I want to come back to you and say, apart from the textbooks, think about, how can we put these books in the hands of every Kenyan child in all the languages, not just in English, in Kidavida, in Kiturkana, the whole range of them. Sunny, We're talking about language, and language is also in clothing, in accessories. Kangas, of course, famously have words on them. You know, I'm so obsessed. Guys, buy kangas for your mothers, your sisters, your aunties, for yourselves. But talk to me about clothing and accessories.
Absolutely. So there's a quote by the very prolific Ghanaian artist Ella Natsui that I always really love to share whenever talking about African textiles and clothing. And it says that textiles are to Africans what monuments are to Westerners. And for me, that quote has always been really important to help us understand the role and the position and the centrality of textiles. Because I think that today it's so easy to think about textiles and the fashion space as very frivolous, right? Whenever we see people who like to put effort in dressing up, there's always some very kind of like odd remarks for like, "Auntie, you're looking nice. Where are you going today?" You know? But really, when you think about it, this dress practice and this kind of like showing up and almost performing is such a key element in many African cultures. And so when we're speaking about reclaiming, and I guess this is a good time to kind of go through the slides. There's another quote, actually, that I'd like to share. So in 2020, Shoma Josie, who some of you may know, is a very famous South African artist. She gave a keynote at Design in Daba, and during her presentation, she said we shouldn't museumify our culture. And I don't think museumify is a word, but it does the thing. It is now. We shouldn't museumify our culture, we should live it. And I think that, for me, that quote, again, is such a key thought when we talk about reclaiming, is that it's so easy when we're looking at clothing and accessories to interact with cultural heritage from a very kind of like distance place. So we go to the museum and we see photos of all of this incredible ceremonial dress and traditional dress. And so, you know, you see it in the museum, you see photos of it, and maybe you see it on a mannequin, and then you leave. But I think that it's in fact a matter of urgency that we interact with this culture and with this cultural memory without the glass. And I wanted to just highlight the work of some creatives across the continent who, for me, are really doing a phenomenal job at some of this reclamation. So this is a Songa skirt called the Zibelani. What's interesting about this skirt is that this silhouette exists in many, many African cultures across the continent, including here in Kenya, but in Sisal. It's been interesting to see the way that creatives across South Africa have been interacting with this skirt. So as I said, Shoma Josie famously uses this skirt while performing on stage. I think pretty much every single performance, at some point she'll wear the skirt. And then on the right-hand side at the top, we have a photo of the designer Rich Mnisi, who also made his own iteration of this skirt. And then below that, we have a South African product and furniture company called Mashti Design, who again used the silhouette of this skirt to create this really beautiful light pendant. And I think that, again, when we're looking at and interacting with these things that were used way before our time, as opposed to just kind of like upholding it as cultural memory, as cultural heritage, it's important for us to think about how we can interact with it now. So how are we able to interact with this object and make them applicable in the context in which we exist? And I think that that's why the example of this, and it's called the tutu lampshade, is such a phenomenal example. Is that like maybe you don't necessarily have somewhere to wear this fantastic Zibelani skirt, you know, but that you can buy this lampshade and still be able to honor your heritage, to honor your kind of like ancestral lineage by having this shade. Locally, we have this really famous Swahili plasterwork called Zidaka that's found along the coast. And in 2018, the Kenyan designer Nyango Mpinga did a really beautiful collection and kind of centered the motif of this Zidaka in the prints of the collection. And she made all of these amazing dresses and tops and scarves. And again, you know, we live in Nairobi, you don't really find zidakas anywhere. There's a couple of restaurants that may have it. But let's say you are born in Lamu and you want to be able to honor that in some way, and you've moved into some apartment somewhere in Kilimani, and you cannot negotiate with your landlord on how to put in a zidaka in your house. But at least then Anyango gives us the opportunity to honor this heritage, that you can go in and buy a scarf, and you can go in and you can buy a blouse, right? And then lastly, and perhaps probably the most famous is, so in South Africa, there's a tribe called the Xhosa, who are also quite famous for their beadwork. And I think now it's maybe about 11 years ago, there's a designer called Laduma, who created a brand called Mwangola, which is actually what I'm wearing. And this started really as an academic exploration. So Laduma's Xhosa, and when Xhosa boys reach a certain age, they're given an initiative gift of knitwear. And so Laduma's whole thinking was, okay, how can we kind of update this gift of knitwear, and kind of, bring in a couple of elements. So you have this thought of creating something that can replace this traditional knitwear that used to be given, and also referencing this Xhosa beadwork. And he created this brand, Mwangola, which is now incredibly famous, and they've been able to venture out into homeware. So you can see a picture of like some carpets, and to women's wear and men's wear. And again, that's such a great example of being able to visit heritage and kind of like translate it, interact with it, and give the public an offering that they can use in this day and age that makes sense in this context. And because of time, I think I'll stop there.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's just so amazing. And of course, I want you to just keep going on. But because I'm thinking about, and I said my research is on Kanga or Leso, and there's a reason why we use Leso and Kanga. And which one is more Kenyan? How many of you know? Is it Leso? Hands up.
I can tell you.
Kanga, hands up. Okay, find that out. There's a reason that we use Leso on one side and Kanga on the other, but now we all use Kanga, and there's a story. But really, when you wear your Kanga, this is a century worth of history that you're carrying on your body. Mm-hmm. When you wear a Kanga that's been for a special occasion, you're carrying your people with you. This Kanga was given to me by my mother. I'm carrying her with me. And there are all ways in which, talking of language, talking of literature, talking of orature, the texts that we carry with us. I love the idea of a lampshade, right? That you're saying, I may be sitting in Nairobi, but here are my people with me. Just the ways in which we bring this into your space. All the jewelry I'm wearing today comes to me from a place, and there's a story behind it. And I'm saying that because I want you to think about what you're wearing. And whether you just took a picture, put it on Twitter, and said, I'm going for a small meeting in the morning, and we all know what that means. So I have questions for you. I had questions. I've put them in the room. The question that I would like to ask you is, what happened to this National Dress Project? Every 5-10 years, we get this passion. We are creating a national dress. It's showcased. We all celebrate. Nobody buys it. And then 5 years again, another generation comes and says, we are creating a national dress. So I want them to think of those 3 questions and open out to you. Who has questions on language? Who has questions on clothing? Who has questions on accessories? I see one hand right at the back, and a second one, and a third one. Let me take those 3 questions. We'll come back and answer the 6 questions on the table, and if we have time, we'll go back. Mwihaki, I'll keep an eye on you. If you have questions online, I'll come to you next. So the 3 questions. Guys on this side, have we intimidated you, scared you? Okay, I'll come to this side next. Start there.
Hi everyone. Habari zenyu. Muko fiti. Sijui nitumie sheng pia. Nice. My name is Paul Mbugua. I'm a content producer and scriptwriter. Mine is a comment on the tribalism point of our cultural languages. And what I would like to say is tribalism is a political term. It's not social, it's not economical. So as Africans, tribalism is not part of us. It's a political term to divide us, mostly when elections come, okay? So thank you so much and have a good day.
Thank you very much. As the mic moves, that's a really heavy point. The politicization of these identities. Let's just be thinking about that. Next.
Thanks. It's a really quick one to, I guess, Professor Githiora. Is there a term that has been coined for that cognitive dissonance that we feel? So like Asani was saying, maybe I want to feel smart, right? I know intellectually that maybe this is smart, right? But the politics of the office, all of that like really tells me that I need to go towards Western clothes. Or I want to have a really deep conversation, so I default to English, even though I know in my heart that maybe I could have had that conversation in, let's say, Kikuyu or Kiswahili. Have you or other scholars of African language coined a term to kind of define that cognitive dissonance we feel as Africans? Thank you.
And see, we're going back to that idea of the decolonization of our mind, your own personal mind. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Once again, I'm Purity Akoth. This is my question. I want us to ask ourselves, how do we bring in the younger generation, our generation, my generation, when it comes to language? For example, I'm a mother of 3 girls. It's a shame that my girls cannot speak Luo. And, you know, they need to speak Luo. Then another thing, if you ask most these young people who are here, wakienda ushago, ati sasa watu waongee lugha yao. Oh my God, I didn't understand. I can't speak it well. You know, we think it's fancy that we can speak good English and say, you know what, girl? I mean, that is not us. So my real question is, how do we bring this generation? Because if we lose it right now, it's going to be very difficult to bring it back. Thank you.
Eroka Mano, you've got 6 questions, and then we'll come back to those guys.
Right. Who's that? Shall I? Okay. Shall I start with those ones there? Yeah, I mean, it's not...
Plus mine?
Yes, I'll come
Yes,
back to that,
okay,
yeah,
let's
if I
go
can
ahead.
remember it. Yeah. Right. Thanks very much. In a short response, it's actually not a cognitive issue. It's not cognitive dissonance as you're describing it. This is a sociological problem, okay? It is a problem of power versus solidarity. That's how we make language choices. Do you want to be more powerful than the interaction? Yes. Then you speak English. Do you want to be solidary with the person you're dealing with? Yes. So you speak Swahili, Sheng, or the mother tongue that you have, right? So it is really these stances we make. They are conscious, sometimes unconscious, but they can be explained very easily. And that's why I started by saying that this decolonization, at some point, it is really a very individual enterprise. And that leads to the question about how do we teach our children language? Because you can say your children do not speak proper Tholuo right now, but I bet there's somebody else of your same age and possibly same demographic whose children actually speak Tholuo, okay? So there's an element of how do you want to project yourself? In Kenya and in Africa generally, the language of power is the ex-colonial language. English, French, Portuguese, Spanish, whatever you want, okay? That's how you get jobs. That's how you become an engineer. That's how you rise in government, because of your good English, not because of your good Kikuyu or good Doluo or your good Ekegusi. And so once we make these choices, the matter is left to the individual. Now, of course, policymakers have a role to play. You can nudge people in certain directions, okay? And that means offering incentives, right? Offering the idea that there is benefit in the use of mother tongue. The example Mr. Kiarie has brought up here is excellent. The so-called vernacular radio stations, they have proven beyond doubt that our languages can do as much, as well as English or Kiswahili, okay? I see doctors giving up, their views on Inoro. I see politicians coming on board. I see intellectuals. I have seen the Vice Chancellor of the University of Nairobi explaining why the university is having trouble in very clear, ordinary language that the vast majority of the speakers who are interested can understand. They made those choices, okay? They made a choice to speak in that language because they want to express solidarity with the people they're interacting with. But when you want to express power, English is your choice. Then you show the people, I'm above you. I'm more learned than you are. I've got a better job. I'm a professor. You're not.
Wow. And that is so true. And we academics, we like you. If you don't call me Dr. Mshai, I look at you like, okay, go ahead.
Yes, mine is a quick one. I just wanted to respond to the lady who has asked about the younger generation. You know, what will they do? And I want to say that when we went to town, you know, to say we have published indigenous language books in the foreign languages, we started getting inquiries, and I was quite amused by two of those inquiries, because you know, somebody calls or writes and says, you know, I want books in this particular language. So when I followed, you know, what is the age of the child? Person hesitated and said, actually, I am the one who wants the books. So, but I encourage them, there is nothing to be shy about, you know. If you missed out those early years and you want to pick up later, that is actually empowerment. So we do encourage that as much as these books are labeled grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and so on and so forth, they are for learners across the board who want to learn that language. And we want to take them to the next level of introducing virtual lessons. Just an additional point, not necessarily from the questions that have come, is that we are also encouraged by the proliferation of authors. There are so many people who are writing to us. I have developed this particular storybook, this poetry book, this curriculum book for this language, and I want you to publish. It is publishers who do not have the capacity to handle that proliferation of so many authors and so many publishable books. Thank you.
And let me just say, I'm learning Kenya Sign Language through a WhatsApp class. So it's wonderful how we're opening up these spaces. I do want you at some point, Kaka Kiarie, to address the question, what can we do, us, not just you, to make these books more affordable to more of us? But Sunny.
Yeah, so I'll take your question on the national dress. I think that the process for the national dress has been in many ways an impossible task. I think it was 2 years ago when I discovered that the Sunlight national dress search was actually the third attempt at finding a national dress. The first one was shortly after independence, there's another one in the 90s, and then the Sunlight one. And so what's clear is that as Kenyans, we will keep on coming back to this thing, because how do you show up to a space as a Kenyan? If you're Ethiopian, you can show up in a Shema. Nigerian, you can show up in an Agbada. Ghanaian, you show up in Kente. But as a Kenyan, how do you show up and occupy space and declare via your dress choices that you're a Kenyan? What's really interesting is that a placeholder in the meantime appears to be the wristband. And that it happened so quietly, and it has its problematics, but it's kind of holding that space. So sometimes you'll be like walking in like a random street in Germany, and you're like, hiya, you're a Kenyan. And that then becomes this kind of like moment for you to interact and appreciate that. That said, I think that process for the Sunlight National Dress Search doesn't get enough credit, because it was such a well thought out process. Because what they did is that they went and interacted with all the communities across the country, and they distilled into essences what they found occurring similarly in all the majority of the communities across the country. I think where the issue came was that, and this is where for us tribal politics get in the way, is that the minute something started to lean a bit too much towards one tribe, people were like, I can't. It is not me who will wear it.
The politics.
Exactly. And so then, in 2000, I think that was back in 2007, 2006, is that at that time, how do you create something that every single tribe of our 43, 44 tribes will be like, okay, I see myself in that. And so you can see how there is something slightly impossible about that. And what's also easy to forget is that all the other national dresses and national outfits that we always reference, didn't need the same amount of consensus. So when you look at the Agbada, it is not a Nigerian dress. Like, yes, now it can be referred to as a Nigerian dress, but it was first. Exactly. It first came from the Yoruba. Same thing with the Kente cloth. The Kente cloth is an Ashanti cloth. And I think that that's something that needs to be negotiated. And I'm pretty sure that in another something years, we will do another search for a national dress, and that we will not stop until we are able to find something that we can hold and embrace and show up in and be able to declare our Kenyanness.
Leso. Every Kenyan woman has a leso. You gentlemen, look for yourselves. I'm coming to the audience. I have 2 questions. 1, 2, 3. Muyaki, do you have questions?
Thank you very much for that lovely presentation. My question is for Sunny. And when you showed us the different fabrics from the different countries, how come you didn't mention the work that you've done around textile explorations and the fabric that you did? So would it be possible for you to tell us a little bit more about that process and what it means for you as a Kenyan?
The famous Kenyan culture of being humble. That is what you have just seen displayed. You've been called on it.
Thank you. My question goes to any one of you, and it has to do with the commodification of our identity. When you talk about us having to learn our languages, which is a good thing, and it being published, it now has to create this product which has copyright or some patent or trademark on it, which then hikes the price, and then it makes me question why is my language and my identity having to be sold for me to learn it? And so the tension between knowledge sharing and intellectual property and the economics surrounding all that, I'd really love to hear a comment from you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Musani Kimani Wanjiro. And my question, I would like to direct my question to, or thoughts to KK and Prof. There is probably a very valid and philosophical reason why, for instance, ancient Egypt, for writing and languages, they were using hieroglyphics. And the power about visuals, the beauty about visuals. And that's why even currently you find the younger generation has embraced emojis and so on. There's something about visuals. And I want to connect this with a pet subject that I really passionate about, and that's the space and place of comics and graphic novels in Kenya. Those books you're doing, have you considered them, even if in the for the younger generation? And that's where I'm giving the connection of visuals, doing them in comics, because to be honest, we're not doing very well in that area of comics and graphic novels and graphics storytelling in Kenya, probably the region. Thank you.
Thank you. And as the mic comes forward, thank you, Kimani, for that question, because it also brings the question of visual language. This morning we heard of how it's right here to the front there. We had moved from writing Kiswahili from the Arabic script to the Roman script, and I wonder if we could create our own script. I know I saw a lot of Africans beginning to jump off Black Panther and that Wakanda script and beginning to discover, because we always say Africans are oral people, and that's true, but we also were a literate people, and we can create, just as we've created Kenya Sign Language. So that's something I'm always thinking about, but yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mshai. Oh, okay, sorry, I thought he can see me because I'm seated at the front, but let me stand. So thank you so much for the wonderful discussions, and being a poet who writes on using Gikuyu as my mother tongue and in different other languages. It has been very enlightening listening to you. So I had a question for Sani. I'd like you to sort of give a comment and your observations on the reclaiming of Ankara. It's something that I've seen happening a lot in Kenya. There's a time when, you know, you'd be invited for a wedding and only 2 people showed up, but now suddenly it's everywhere and it suddenly become acceptable. If you could take us through that, what has been happening, what were the triggers and things like that. I'm curious about that. And also the use of the brown attire. I have a name for it in my mother tongue. So it's the dress that ladies wear for weddings. I'm sure all of us know, but it's called mwego and modhuru. So those are the ones that you see in a lot of Kikuyu traditional in Kikuyu weddings. So it's becoming common. So maybe if you could speak on that. And the last question is to Professor Githiora. So we've seen a lot of use of borrowing of terms from other communities, and it's becoming sort of like the default term. So I'll refer to this particular one, Rorasio. It's been used by every Kenyan to refer, and everyone knows what it is in reference to, but we don't use the English name. I'm curious about that, and if that's something that we can sort of lean towards in a way to sort of decolonize ourselves and just look at that and see, we're already heading that way. We might, you know, how else can we sort of move in that direction? Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. We have 2 questions from our online audience. First from Jacqueline Mwangi, who says, on the decolonization agenda, do you think Kenya is doing enough to promote the Swahili language? First, as our national language. Second, as a way to promote our culture. And then also use it potentially for cultural diplomacy with other nations internationally. The second question comes from George Arabu, and he makes an observation about how when Kenyans switch to mother tongue, it could be divisive, or it could be seen as disregarding others. So when is it a good time to use mother tongue, especially when it comes to public forums and cosmopolitan setups?
Shukriya to all of you. I'm really sorry that we can't take any more questions. We are actually already over time. So please make your closing comments. These guys are here. They're not allowed to go before lunch ends. So for those of you who are here, make sure you grab them. For those of you who are online, I'm sure our hosts will find ways of keeping these conversations going. So, kaka karibuni nyote. Who wants to start?
I can start. And I can respond to the first question. Yes, I've been caught. So it's such a big project, but kind of going back to this idea of a national dress, I'd been curious, perhaps, that what might be interesting to investigate is a Kenyan textile. And so in 2020, set out this project called Nanga, which many of you know means anchor. And for me, the reason for that name was that I really see textiles as a tether to cultural memory, to cultural heritage. And the approach to that textile project was around investigating and trying to find a visual language to develop a printed textile that can stand up and rival Ankara. And I'll answer the Ankara question in part at this moment, because I think that, and for me certainly, I'd really spent a long time criticizing Ankara and highlighting the problematics, but I also found myself asking myself, okay, so what's the solution, you know? It's easy to criticize, but okay, so what is the offering? So around this investigation around visual language and motive, I worked with two graphic designers, so Lulu Kitololo and Monica Obaga, to develop motifs that can be transferred onto textile. And so we finished and released the project in September of last year, with a total of about 5 prints. So Nandi Flame, there's a Matatu print, there's one that's inspired by henna motifs and patterns that are found in the coast, and there's one that's inspired by corn, maize, and that whole process was so interesting because, you know, you look at so much material and you try and find a motif that really captures the Kenyan experience, that when people see the motif, they're able to see themselves, they're able to see the experience honored, and that I think that I can say that we did that fairly successfully. I think for me, the thing that was particularly interesting was the response to the project. And so we released the project, and true to this same style, I think we put up a post on Instagram. We're like, okay, so here is some fabric, and we put it in a store in Westlands. And I don't think I've ever quite had a response like that to anything that I've put out. But the fabric sold out in an hour. Wow. And for me, that was incredibly humbling, and also incredibly validating, because what then happened was the conversations and the messages that we got up until now have been so beautiful to read and to experience, because people have been buying the fabric out of this deep sense of patriotism, and someone will call you and tell you and say thank you, because I'm able to see myself in this textile. And I think that that's the thing that we've never been able to see with Ankara, because remember that we were never the primary market for Ankara. In fact, Africa was never the primary market for Ankara. What happened is that the Dutch set out to make Ankara to sell in, and actually Dutch wax to be specific, to sell in Indonesia, which at the time was a Dutch colony. The Indonesians looked at it and said, this quality we reject. And so the Dutch were able to find a secondary market in West Africa. And that for the longest time, West Africa remained the primary market for Dutch wax. And because of that, a lot of the symbols and motifs that existed in wax print resonated in that area. So you see like a print of a bird. When it comes here, you're like, okay, this nice birds, okay, great. But then in Nigeria, in Ghana, that bird means something. And so as Kenyans, we've never been able to see ourselves kind of like captured in this motif language. And I think that was really, really interesting. And it's an ongoing project. And that on the other hand, again, this idea of Kenyanness, because it really can be quite difficult. Another part of the project, which isn't quite publicly available yet, but it was more of an artistic exploration, is that, okay, so when you think about Kenyanness, if the kind of like tribal politics are difficult to navigate, what happens if you remove the tribal politics and you remove people? And so we did some work with a couple of textile mills, so Tosheka in Wote and Beacon of Hope up in Rongai. And we did 2 different sustainable textiles. So one was woven out of sisal and cotton, and the other one was woven out of eri silk and cotton. And with the eri silk and cotton one, what we did was to think about Kenya as a place, and to think about the land and the soil as a holder of memory. So we finished the textile, and we buried the textile over a period of a couple of days. And what I was particularly interested in is to be able to, again, capture the memory of the earth and the memory of the soil, and also give the land an opportunity to imprint itself onto this textile. Because for me, that textile is undeniably Kenyan, because it holds the memory and the fingerprint of the land. And so it's a very kind of like artistic exploration, and I really apologize that there are no images, but I assure you the images are somewhere.
You're going to have to make more of this available. Thank you very much.
Yes, I just want to say something about the aspect of commodification, or for that matter, commercialization of our languages. I want to say, yes, she has a point. The ideal position is that it should be free. And we are recording those grandmothers' fireside stories. We never used to pay to be told stories in the evening. But there is a whole aspect of now the changing times. There is a production of that particular story. There is a distribution of that particular story. There is the effort that has gone into, packaging the whole. So that creative person who has taken the pain to do that, we certainly need some compensation. What we can say is that there is a big role that the government should play to ensure that these particular products are as affordable as possible. even those who have invested in the creative space, basically are driven by the cultural and the philosophical, desire to share, not necessarily by the commercial aspect. And for us publishers, we always say that, an ideal publishing house is the one that takes cognizance of the fact that an ideal publishing house lies between what Samuel Beckett called the cathedral and the stock market exchange. The cathedral, in the sense that that publishing house publishes books that are not necessarily geared towards the commercial aspect of it, the cultural, the philosophical, feeding society with what that society really needs to have. And then the flip side is that the stock market exchange, to package, to distribute, you spend money. So how do you recoup that investment? So it's a very delicate balancing act because, again, we do not want it to be purely a labor of love. And I agree with Kimani Wawanjiro about the need to package these products in different formats to excite the users. The comics, I know he's very passionate about comics, and I know the space that comics occupy in Japan, the manga, all over. So it's a space that we are keen to explore. We have done it in a small way, but I will say, well, we have taken the challenge. We need to package in a more exciting, more inviting, more encouraging kind of format. There is an issue of, again, tribalism has come up, but I think the young gentleman there responded very well. It's purely a political term, so I do not want to dwell so much on it. I do not think that it creates divisiveness. My parting shot is, let us value, let us respect our languages. Let us endeavor to speak them as much as possible, to teach our children, and by doing so, we will ensure these books are bought, and the whole business of publishing books depends on volumes. The more the volumes, the lower the production cost, and hence the final price of the book. If you produce only 100 copies of this book, you are likely to sell it at 5,000 Kenya shillings. If you produce 10,000 copies of the same book, you are likely to sell it at 200 Kenya shillings. So the ball is on all of us. If we are using these books, if we are buying these books, if we are teaching our children using these books, then the volumes will increase and the price will also come down. Of course, we have also thrown the challenge to the government. It has taken up the challenge, and there is a commitment from the government that it will invest in ensuring free distribution of indigenous language books in the country by the end of this year. Thank you very much.
Niweka?
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. My final word. Thank you very much. Just to add to that a little bit, you mentioned the Japanese manga, and I fully agree with the gentleman's point about graphic novels. Other than Japan, Hausa has done very well. Okay, Hausa in Nigeria, comics are in Hausa. Most people walk around with a copy in their pocket. Usually basic love stories, not much, just romantics, because obviously it's also a Muslim society, and so. But according to a colleague of mine who has done extensive research in that part of Africa, that has made a huge impact on the people, and it has also helped promote and maintain the Hausa language in a very big way. So absolutely. Now, back in Kenya, I do remember a graphic novel that came out some years back, maybe 10, 15 years ago, produced by Sasasema Publications, which has since folded. In fact, very sadly, I met the owner, editor, whatever she was. She was an American, I think.
Yes.
On the day she was leaving Kenya after having failed to excite us with graphic novels, okay? What she was producing. So obviously there is an issue there to tackle. Let me say that one way of promoting our languages is to regard language as a skill, because this is something we forget very much. Language is a skill, just like driving a car, or being able to use a computer, being computer literate, being able to use a word program. Is a skill. That means a skill means something you can do, others can't. Language is a skill, okay? You can translate with a doctor, that's something valuable. You can help somebody else be understood, that is a skill. And so we have to think of language also in that way, that knowledge of and again, I won't belabor this point. There's no time to talk about why indigenous languages. They are just languages, like every other language. Yeah? As a linguist, we talk about language families, Bantu languages, Nilotic, Nilo-Saharan, and so forth. We don't talk about indigenous languages because languages are indigenous everywhere they are, okay? So this label of indigenous is also a bit problematic because it only applies to African languages and Latin American languages. You go to Mexico, lenguas indígenas de Mexico. You come to Africa, you say, the indigenous. But you go to Spain, Basque is a small, tiny language spoken by a very small number of people, less than the Maasai people of Kenya. But it's a language, okay? It's not called indigenous by anybody. But these are all political issues, and indeed, I cannot help but belabor the point about language and politics and language and unity. The idea that language is the sole cause of, conflict is very, very mistaken, okay? Language, yes, can bring people together, as Swahili does for us. But that does not mean the other conflicts have been eliminated, okay? So look at it conversely, two examples. On one hand, we have two neighboring countries who literally speak one language in their own territory. I don't have to name them, you know them. I can say Somalia. Another one, Rwanda. Again, Kinyarwanda, everybody speaks Kinyarwanda. If you speak Kirundi, just a bonus. They are practically dialects of one another. But unfortunately, that has not helped solve political problems in those two countries, okay? Now we move to China and Arabic-speaking part of the world. I know, and maybe people get shocked when they hear that Chinese is not one language. It's not a language, actually. It's a collection of dialects. And some of them are so distinctive from one another that some Chinese from other parts of China cannot understand the official standard Mandarin variety of Chinese. But every Chinese person believes and says and proudly says, we speak Chinese. There are some differences here and there, but we speak Chinese. It's a political, ideological position. Arabic, same thing. An Algerian, or Tunisian can have difficulties, if not impossible, discussion with somebody speaking colloquial Arabic from in Cairo. But they can read the same because the script is the same. However, due to cultural and most importantly, religious affiliation, Arabic is seen as one language, okay? But we know that is, from a linguistic point of view, is a collection of dialects. But they're not fighting over that. Actually, they're very happy to call each other Arabic speakers, Chinese speakers. Well, our languages, in fact, in Kenya, in my own analysis, each one of us can at least understand one of 12 languages only in Kenya, because they are widely spoken in certain parts of the country. So we have 60 languages, but I can bet that if you speak a Kenyan language, you need to speak only one of 12 to communicate with all the other Kenyans. So this discussion about language and ethnicity and conflict has to be taken with a lot more subtlety, because I'm afraid in Kenya we deal it very, very straightforwardly as, language A versus language B, ethnicity A versus ethnicity B. So I will end that, but on a positive note, in respect to your question earlier, I think the ray of hope lies in Kiswahili, right? Swahili is definitely, I don't think we are being made fun of by being elevated by having a Swahili Day by the UNESCO. Now we have one day a year to think about Kiswahili in recognition of its status around the world. The African Union has also recently adopted Kiswahili as one of their working languages. Amazing, considering that they've had French, even Spanish, which is spoken by one single country in Kenya, in Africa. It was on the list of working languages of the African Union. But now, officially, it means working language, it means you can actually present something in Kiswahili and somebody will translate it and file it in Kiswahili or French or English or whatever it is. Very normal practice with international organizations. Shouldn't be a big deal. If you look at the budget of the European Union, right, in Brussels, the translation budget alone, you make your head roll. In fact, that's why some countries want to leave the EU, because they think those costs are too high. Why should I be paying for people to translate my point, my MBEP's position, into 10, 20 different languages? But that's the price you have to pay for unity. The price you have to pay for the larger blocks. And in Africa, we have to pay financial price. We cannot expect our languages to grow by themselves. That's all. Thank you.
And indeed, I look forward to the time the British Council's English program will be speaking Kiswahili and English to build trust and build those kind of bridges. Please join me in thanking very, very much our amazing panel, in thanking the technical team, the sign language interpreters, and all of you. From the very bottom of my heart, in the language of my heart, Chapcheni Nandihi, asanteni sana sana.